about something called general and special revelation. I'll explain that in a second, but what I'm going to really do is, as you know, today is Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. It's a Sunday that churches all across the nation have dedicated today to reflect on the issue of abortion and to, train ourselves to think better and respond better to the national crisis, really. I think 58 million babies have been killed since Roe v. Wade. So it's not an overstatement to call it a national crisis. And the second thing that the churches, hopefully around the country, are doing today is joining our voices in unison in prayer to God to say that this 58 million and counting number is something bigger than us. And we're just asking God to do something and hopefully use us in that. And so I wanted to reflect on that and talk about and think about it in the message today or tonight. I also, I don't know if any of you are golfers. If you're golfers, are you familiar with the term mulligan? Tonight I'm going to try to take a mulligan. A few months ago, I went through Psalm 19, and I got done and thought, I'm not sure I was as clear as what I wanted to be. So what I'm going to try tonight is go back through Psalm 19 and hopefully show you not only what that psalm is talking about, but this will be different. How does that shape the way we think through issues like abortion? I have a couple big goals tonight. One is to show you that really and truly the issue's already settled, right? Every single person already knows in their hearts, I should not kill my children, right? Every person on this earth knows that abortion's wrong. We have been deceived. We've suppressed that knowledge, but there's a law written on our hearts. And so I want to tell you that we kind of have an advantage here in this fight for life. The other thing I want to try to emphasize and stir us to tonight is to recognize that in addition to wanting people to know the truth about right and wrong here, as Christians, we have a task that goes, I believe, above and beyond that. There is a task that all people all over the world can know matters of right and wrong. But only Christians who have the Word of God at our disposal are able to show everyone in the world how not only is it true that we have sinned, but that our souls can be restored. Right? So our task in this fight for life, in this fight against abortion, is partly to fight against the sin of murder. But as Christians, there's something bigger than that. It's to tell the world there's hope, there's new life, there's restoration available to you. And only this church, and I don't mean Raiford Road, but I mean the church of God who stands on and lives by his word, we're the only people equipped to do that. So with those goals in mind, if you'll do me a favor and open your Bibles to Psalm 19, and I'd like for you to stand with me in honor of reading God's word. And we'll read together what I think is one of the more interesting passages in the Bible. Psalm 19 says, to the choir master, it's a psalm of David. He says in verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. But their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber, and like a strong man that runs his course with joy. And it's rising from the end of the heavens, and its circuit is to the end of them, and there is nothing that is hidden from its heat. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Declare me innocent from hidden faults. Keep back your servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then I shall be blameless and innocent of great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I ask for your Spirit to fill me as I preach your word in such a way that it will be clear, understandable, life-changing, motivating, that we will fall in love with your words and recognize that they are more desirable than gold, much fine gold, and sweeter than honey from a honeycomb. I pray that today and tonight as we talk, that we will understand the incredible privilege you've given us in exposing us to your word, and we can think a little bit about what we've really been studying on Sunday mornings recently, about the stewardship that's required from that. We have an amazing privilege that we can gather tonight to read this word of life, and I ask that you teach us to think well about how to use that for your glory. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Titled it a theological title, which is usually not something you do because it's off-putting, but general and special revelation. So if you're not familiar with those terms, let me try to catch you up. General revelation is a theological category for God's ability to reveal things about himself in the world that he's created, right? So as Psalm 19 started, is when we look at the heavens, there's things about God that we can see just by looking at the world he created. Things that God has shown us about himself in the world that he created, in the natural world, that is general revelation. Special revelation is when outside of this creation, God, in a special way, steps into this created world to bring a special word. It is not accessible to every single person in creation. It's accessible to those people who are made recipients of the special breaking into the created world. I've put in the top of your notes a quote from a man named B.B. Warfield, or Benjamin Warfield. I don't know. Sometimes people call him Benjamin, sometimes people call him B.B., and B.B. just sounds like too colloquial for me. I don't know why, but I'm not going to read the quote because though I think it's beautiful, it's also kind of wordy, and I'm worried that I would stumble all over it. But he makes 3 big points. He says when you think of general and special revelation, there's 3 things that kind of distinguish those. One is the means by which they come into the earth, or at least that we become aware of them. He said general revelation or natural revelation is just that. It's something that is natural. Every thing that we view as part of nature, trees and mountains and rivers and our DNA, these are things that God has created to be a system that is constantly renewing itself and telling us about the glory of God who made it, spoke it into being, sustains it. This is a natural way that God is declaring himself to everybody. Special revelation is not natural, it's supernatural. Right? It's a break from this natural world. It's when God, instead of just the normal day-to-day, God steps into history in a unique way, like when he sends his only son to this world. It's a break of the normal pattern, right? When God, our normal interactions, God is not speaking to us verbally with clarity, the way he did when he especially broke into the world through the prophets and apostles to write his scriptures. Right? This is out of the norm. It's a special way that God has communicated to us. There's a second way. He says, another way that these two are different is that general revelation or natural revelation is available or accessible for every single person. Every intelligent creature that God has made has the ability to recognize some things about God simply by virtue of living in the world that God has made. So special revelation is not that way. Not everybody has the privilege of knowing what God has said in his word or through his son. It's something that he has specially revealed to people that he has chosen to reveal it to. In fact, if you do not have a Bible to read, if you don't know how to read, or you don't have a chance to listen to it be read aloud or preached, and you don't have access to special revelation, which is why our missionary task is so incredibly important. Romans 10 is going to say, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Why? Because if we believe, we can be saved, but how can they believe in the one in whom they have never heard? Right? This is a special thing, which means we have a special responsibility. In that quote, there's a third difference between general and special revelation. He's going to say something to the effect of that general revelation is meant to teach us things about God and even teach us about our need for God. But only special revelation meets that need. Only special revelation can tell us how we can be saved, how we can be made new. Right? The whole world, every single person who's ever lived should be able to look at the world and be able to realize something's not right. Something is messed up with this world. This is not the way it should be. But only those of us who have access to the Bible can say, you're right, and I can tell you how it'll be fixed. I can tell you how you could be made new. Special revelation is special because it does something that we cannot do without it. Hopefully that's at least a decent introduction to it. There's two major passages. We're only going to look at one of them tonight, though I might mention the other. The two major passages that deal with general and special revelation are Psalm 19, which we're going to look at tonight. And Paul talks about it a lot in Romans really 1, 2, and 3, but especially Romans 2. We're going to look at Psalm 19, and I'm just going to walk through it with you kind of quickly. If you remember, we just read it, 1 through 6 is all about general revelation. And sometimes you'll hear me switch and use the word natural revelation, just depending on which person you're reading. They might call it general or natural, and hopefully you can understand why that is. But there's some things that are really three big ideas that are important to recognize in these first 6 verses. The first is that there is actually something that you can know about God by observing the world he made. Right? So whether you have the Bible or not, you can walk outside and look at the heavens and recognize that they're declaring the glory of the one who made them. Whoever it is that ordered this world must be impressive. Now, this is information available to every single person. Every single person should know and can know some things about God simply by looking around. There's another thing that 1 through 6 emphasizes, and this may be the bulk of those verses, is it says not only is there something that we can know about God, but that everybody knows about God. That this nature is constantly telling every single person. Day to day, every night is telling people who experience day and night something about God. It says when the sun rises in the morning on the east and sets on the west, it's just running a course in which it's constantly saying God is doing something crazy. He's making the world, now we thought he was making the earth spin, the sun spin. Now we know, no, he's making us spin like a basketball on his finger, that God must be incredibly powerful, and there is nobody who doesn't have access to that. There's one more thing that is brought up in 6. It's not only that we can know something about God, and it's not only that everybody can know something about God, but verse 6 hints at the fact that there are things that we can't not know about God. It's impossible to escape certain knowledge about God. There's things that we can't not know. I know that's a double negative, bad grammar, but it's impossible not to know certain things about God. You see this in verse 6, because there is nowhere, he says, there is nowhere that you can go to hide from the heat of the sun. Nowhere you can go. There's no way to escape this testimony. Anywhere I go to get away from the sun, it doesn't matter. I feel it. I can't hide from it. Philosophers have worked through this, and they've just noticed there's an idea, not only that I can't hide from the fact that God is, there's some things that are built into my DNA that make it where I just can't help but know that God exists. Philosophers, not necessarily Christian philosophers, but just philosophers in general, call this a natural law. There's just truths that are built into us, and we just can't escape them. Let me read to you one philosopher. This guy's name, whoever assigns these names, is Budashevsky is how you say it, but how could you ever figure that out by looking at the spelling of it? But he's a professor at the University of Texas in Arlington, and he's written a couple books. One is What We Can't Not Know, and he argues in that book that there are moral truths that you can't not know. Here's the thesis to the whole book. He says there are certain moral truths that really are common to all human beings. Because our shoes are wet with evasions, the common ground may seem slippery to us, but it's real. We do all know that we shouldn't murder, that we shouldn't steal, that we should honor our parents, we should honor God, and so on. Right? In the philosophy of how do we know things are right and wrong, philosophers say natural law is that thing that's embedded in us. It says there is right and wrong, and we all know it. Now, we become practiced, Paul will say, at trying to keep ourselves from fully accepting it. We reject it, we suppress it, and God gives us over to minds that aren't very good at reading the law that's been written in our hearts. But Paul also seizes on this idea in Romans 2. He says, there's people out there, even though they've suppressed the truth and it's hidden and it's hard to find, he says, you still will notice that they do keep the law. Sometimes they break it, but sometimes they keep it. He says, but as they do keep the law, they are proving something. They are proving that that law is written on their hearts. So not only that, when somebody else breaks that law that's written in our hearts against us, we get angry about it. Right? This is Romans 2:1. He says, when somebody offends you, you judge them, which is the same standard by which you're going to be judged. It is because you're proving that you know right and wrong. If Jeannie slaps me in the face and I get angry, then if I go and slap somebody else in the face, I've proven that I knew it was wrong because I was angry when she did it to me. Paul says that shows that you have a law in your heart and you cannot get away from it. Now, Paul says there's a problem for us, though, because that law written on our heart leaves us without excuse. There's some debate about verse 6 in Psalm 19. Nothing is hidden from its heat. I'm pretty convinced that this verse has a sort of double meaning going on. In one sense, it just means that nobody can get away from the reality of this natural law, the reality that God has revealed some things to us that we can't not know. But I also think that getting away from the heat is intentionally chosen to show that we want to get away from it, but we can't, right? Because there's a heat from the sun that is causes sunburns, right? It scorches the earth. There's a heat that can come from the sun that while the sun is a good and blessed thing, when you're under it, at sometimes you can feel its oppression. The same thing's true of the law of God that's written in our hearts. We all know what God expects and requires of us, even though we have tried to suppress it. But nobody can get away from it so much so that they don't feel the heat of it. In other words, he's saying all of us feel guilt. All of us feel the consequences of having broken the law that's written in our hearts. Paul says, we all are without excuse. All right, let me pause for a second and make sure that we follow. This has just been kind of like a schoolroom argument that I've given. But hopefully you're following with me. God says, I've written it into our DNA and into the world that I've created that every single person has enough knowledge to know that I exist, that I'm glorious, and that I have expectations, and that you've broken those expectations. The law that's written on our hearts, this general law, is enough to prove that we stand guilty before God. You'll hear sometimes people ask, well, what about the guy who lived under a rock in Africa and nobody preached to him? Paul would say, David would say, nobody has ever lived without the revelation from God that he exists, that he is good and awesome, that he has expectations, and nobody lives without understanding that I am breaking those expectations. We all live with guilt. We might try to suppress or repress that knowledge, but it's universal. We all know it. But there's a problem with it, because that's where it leaves us. Right? All that general revelation is able to tell us is that there is right and wrong, and we shouldn't do wrong, but we do it anyway. And so we're guilty. So then David says, but there's good news. In verse 7, he says, the law of the Lord is perfect because it revives the soul. General revelation is good, but special revelation, when God has given us his word, that's perfect. And the reason it's perfect is that it can make you new again. You feel the guilt of breaking his law? Read his word and find out how to be made new again. It goes on to give some other examples of great things about God's law, but I don't think they're really new. I think they're just unpacking and expanding this idea that God has given us a special gift in his word that doesn't just tell us right and wrong. It tells us how to be new again, how to be joyful again, how to experience the goodness of God all like he designed us to do. Nobody can do that outside of the Bible. It's perfect. But with the Bible, we can be made right with God. With God's revelation about himself through his word, we know how to be made right again. And so he concludes that 7 through 11 section by saying, and because of that, you should understand that as good as the stars in the heavens are and as awesome as they are, you should recognize that the Bible is infinitely better. It's better than anything in nature. It's better than gold. It's better than much fine gold. It's better than the sweetest thing in nature. It's better than honey and the drippings from the honeycomb. That there is nothing more valuable than this word. Because by it, your soul can be made new again. David goes on and gives some of his own response to thinking about this. He starts in verse 12 by saying, and because of this, I want to quit living my life based on these observations of myself and inward reflection, and I want to live according to what God is telling me. He's shifting what is his primary source of information about the world? Who can discern their faults? If the whole way that I want to know God is through me figuring it out, he says that it won't be good enough. And so what he does is he switches and says, no, God, I want you to show me. I want you to be the one that reveals things to me. And then he also says, God, I want you to be the one that acquits me, makes me right again, and protects me from continuing in the sins that I've committed. That's the argument of Psalm 19, and I tried to do it fairly quickly. There are things that we can't not know. There's right and wrong things, and we all know them deep in our heart. And we also all know that we've broken those, that we've done the wrong things. But God has specially given us his word to show us how our life can be restored. And because of that, we should say, God, I want you to show me something I could have never figured out on my own, how you can acquit my sins. And acquit meaning make me right again, take away the guilt, and then make me able to start doing the right thing now. What I want to do now is try to think through this logical argument, right, of what David has laid out in the case of abortion. Right? How does this play out in just kind of the real life world that we walk through? What I want to show you first off is that I really do truly believe that every single person in America, really every single person on earth, already knows in our hearts that abortion is wrong. It's a law that has been written in our hearts. I thought of 3 examples, and I've included them in your notes that kind of show why I think everybody already knows this. The first one I wanted to point out to you is that the fact that we currently give medical attention, including there's something called open fetal surgery, the fact that we're already doing this for babies is proof that we know that there are living babies inside a womb that are worthy of having their lives saved. Right? We have to know that in order to even venture into a medical task of saving them. I've written a little bit of detail here. There's something I thought was really fascinating. I've heard a while ago about open fetal surgery, and I originally thought about showing the video tonight of an open fetal surgery because it is fascinating. They actually put the mother to sleep, and they open her belly and the uterus, and there's, in the video I saw, a little hand that just shoots right out. And they put a heart monitor on the hand, and they do a surgery on the baby. And they, after the surgery, close it back up and close the mother back up, and she continues to carry the baby. I watched the video, and I thought, as amazing as it is, it's also very graphic, and decided, for the sake of everyone, I'll let you make the decision yourself if you want to go watch it. But I do want to tell you the story of one, and to me it's important to tell you also the source of this story. There's an article that was published by CNN. It was reported by CNN. It was published in 2016. It was titled, "Meet the Baby Who Was Born Twice." It's the story of a lady named Margaret Boehmer, who she originally was pregnant with twins. First twin died in the course of the pregnancy, and the second one they discovered was having some complications, and they looked and figured out what was going on, that it had a tumor on its spinal cord. This tumor was basically absorbing all the blood so that no blood was getting to the baby's brain, and it was about to kill her second baby that was still in utero at the time. The doctor said, well, we need to bring you in immediately, basically right away, and we're going to do open fetal surgery. They did. They did the whole process I just told you about. They put the mother to sleep. They cut her open, exposed the baby. They removed the tumor from the baby in utero, sewed her back up, the whole thing, and then she gets up, and at that point she's on bed rest because she's trying to recover from surgery, but she carries the baby full term. I think not quite. I think it was 36 weeks, if I remember right, but close. And the baby was born healthy and happy. CNN reported this and said, this is the story of the miracle of Lynn Lee, in one of the subtitles of it. Lynn Lee was the name of the baby. And they said in the article that this surgery saved the baby's life. And that's where I thought, do you even know what you just said? Because I'm assuming everyone would agree that CNN would not be thought of as a leading pro-life source in our nation. But they did confess that this was a life that was saved. Right? Do you see what they're saying? That the miracle of being able to do a surgery in utero shows that there is a living baby inside the womb that can be saved and is worthy of it. And when it happens, we say, now that's a miracle. They report the mom saying, this was the most painful and hard experience of my life. She said, and I would do it again in a heartbeat for the joy of seeing my baby playing with her brothers and sisters. And we cannot live in a world where we see babies in utero having surgeries to remove tumors, and we say this is a miracle and this life was saved, and not simultaneously be saying the babies in our wombs are lives that are worthy of being saved. We already know it. We already know it. Let me tell you another reason that I think every single American already knows that the babies in our wombs ought to be saved, that abortion is wrong. And that is because we currently prosecute, it is illegal in most states in America to murder, it's called fetal homicide laws, to murder a fetus. Now let me give you the most recent story that I found. There was a man in Tampa that had done this in 2013. I was looking that up, but I found out that there's currently, in December of this year, a man in Virginia who was a doctor. He had moved to Virginia recently and had a girlfriend, and they had been dating for 16 weeks, I think, when she tells him that she's pregnant. And so he invites her to a date at his house, makes a nice dinner for her, and he takes a drug called misoprostol. Did I say that correctly? It's an abortion drug. He crushes it and puts it into her drink. Apparently, the normal dose is about 200 milligrams, and he used 800 milligrams. So that forces her into labor, and the baby obviously dies in that process, and she finds out that he had drugged her drink and forced the baby to die in that way. And she prosecutes. She calls the police and said, he's murdered my baby. He is currently in jail, awaiting trial that will happen in March. If it happens similarly to this guy in Tampa, the guy in Tampa did basically the exact same thing. He ended up being tried for first-degree murder for this. He accepted a plea deal, which rather than having life in prison, was able to get 15 years, so he's serving a 15-year sentence. The judge just went to a U.S. district court, so it wasn't a local Tampa court, it's a U.S. district court. The judge commented on this man who did that in Tampa and said, I don't think Mr. Weldon is an evil person. He said, but he committed an evil act, and for that, he's going to have to pay the consequences. It's interesting to me that in a court system, right, I know this wasn't the Supreme Court, but it's the same court system that says abortion is okay, that when you give a woman an abortive drug without her knowledge, you call it an evil act. Right? There's something that's showing, your heart is starting to show through. Because everybody recognizes that's not right. I know that what he did was not the same as somehow sneaking in and just cutting her hair, like getting rid of a clump of cells, or cutting her fingernails when she wasn't paying attention. He did something that was not the same as getting rid of some cells. He did something that was evil, that was murderous. And for that, he's paying a life sentence. I've never met a person who doesn't agree that these acts are evil acts that these two men did. And the reason is because we know in our hearts that the murder of a baby is an evil thing. It's an evil thing. Even if we try to work in some excuses of sometimes when there might be reasons for it, we knew in our hearts that what that man did was an evil thing. The judge knew it. Let me give you one more reason why I think every single American knows that abortion's wrong. It has become overwhelmingly evident from study after study after study that women who have abortions are very likely, or much more increasingly likely, to have what is now titled post-abortion syndrome, sometimes called post-abortion stress syndrome. Sometimes it's just referred to as PTSD, abortion-related PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. I've put a quote in there from the same guy, Jay Budiszewski. Because it's there, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to read some different statistics to show you what is happening commonly to women who have an abortion. This is taken, by the way, from healthresearchfunding.org, which is not a pro-life organization. This is a pro-choice organization that just recognizes we need to help the women that we are encouraging to have abortions because there's some problems here. They say that women who have an abortion are 3 times more likely than women of childbearing age in the general population to commit suicide. 3 times more likely to commit suicide. The risk of having at least one mental health issue increases 81% for women who have had an abortion compared to women in the general population. Most of this was copied and pasted, but sometimes these weren't complete sentences, and I try to edit, but I can tell I messed up that one. Oh, you don't have this in your notes anyway. I don't have to confess my typos. Teen girls are up to 10 times more likely to attempt suicide than their counterparts who have not had an abortion. And teen girls who have had an abortion are up to 4 times more likely to successfully commit suicide when compared to older women who have had an abortion. 45% of women who have an abortion report having suicidal feelings immediately following their procedure. Nearly half of the women who have an abortion say, I wrestled with the desire to take my own life. 1995 data suggested the rate of deliberate self-harm, so this is things like cutting yourself, is 70% higher after abortion than childbirth. The British Journal of Psychiatry found that there's an 81% increased risk of mental trauma. 2 out of 3 women, so that's about 66% of women who have a late abortion, and they're categorized late as after 12 weeks, suffer from the clinical definition of PTSD. Your women who have an abortion are 34% more likely to develop anxiety disorders, and the increased risk of alcohol and abuse, of alcohol abuse in women who have had abortion is 110%. Abortion is devastating to the women who have an abortion. These are just straight numbers that tell us you cannot have an abortion without it hurting you psychologically, with anxiety, all kinds of other things. I do encourage you to go back and even read those quotes because there was just more to it. People cannot have an abortion without struggling from it. And why is that? It's because there's a law that is written in our hearts, and you cannot break the law and escape the consequences of it. Now, you can repress those feelings. Many people live with repressed guilt, and it's harmful. But you can't escape the guilt of breaking this natural law. I want to pause here for a second and talk about what I think is the first implication of these things. We have people here that are actually counselors for First Coast Women's Services, and I hope that there's something, while this is traumatic, I hope there's something encouraging here that as you try to convince women not to take the lives of their children, you're trying to convince them of something that they already know. We already know. This is the reason why, I don't know how many times it has been told at pregnancy resource banquets that if you show a woman a sonogram of her baby, she is overwhelmingly likely to keep it. And the reason is because she doesn't need to be convinced of the moral arguments for keeping the baby. She already knows that. She just needs to wrestle with and think through what's already in her heart. Am I prepared to take this life? What I want to suggest to you, though, is that because you are Christian counselors, you have a responsibility that only you can perform, right? So it is not unique to Christianity that we can claim that abortion is wrong. None of the things I just read were even out of the Bible. Right? This is just something that is written in our hearts. This is written in a Christian's heart. This is written in, if you're Jewish or Muslim, or even if you're an atheist, this is written in your heart. And there are Jewish people and Muslim people and atheist people who recognize it is not okay to kill a child in the womb, and that they're on the same team for wanting to end abortion. But the ability to work together only can go as far as recognizing right and wrong. What a Christian brings to the table that's unique is that these women who are suffering from the anxiety, depression, and guilt of abortion, if left to the logic of the world, have no hope. Right? If you think through these statistics, which to me were devastating to read, these women are stuck there. And the Bible says, in just what is in our heart, if you just look in, you will never get past the fact that you are guilty. But if you're a believer, you have something to offer them that they could never find themselves, definitely not in themselves. And that is that God will restore their soul. He can make them brand new again. Yeah, there's guilt there. Yeah, there's sadness there, but that does not have to be the end of the story. Right? This is being written, remember, by a man who actually had raped Bathsheba in order to cover it up, had killed her husband. And those are just two of a litany of things that he had done wrong in one single episode. So you talk about a man riddled with guilt. The whole thing ended up costing him the life of his son. If you remember the story of David and Bathsheba, it was a horrifically horrible event. And you know what this man was able to say? God restored my soul. He gave me joy again. He renewed me to the man I was created to be. Only Christians can share that message. I want to tell you quickly, and as briefly as I can, what that message is. The message of Christianity, the message of hope, is that yes, you are guilty, but that Jesus Christ bore your guilt for you. Right? God the Father, knowing that there are people possibly in this room who have killed their children, God says, you know what? In order to cover that, I will kill my child so that the weight of the guilt that is on your shoulders will be placed on his, so that you can walk free, so that you can be alive in your soul again. You can have the joy that you were created for again. The world can never give people this response. They don't know it. What they will do is say, repress it. The thing that got a woman into the abortion clinic is trying to repress this feeling of this isn't right. They go through it and they cannot repress that guilt anymore, and all the world can give them is just repress. Try not to think about it. Try not to dwell on it. But as a Christian, you can say, no, you can think about it. And you can think about the fact that God loved you so much that he gave his son for you so that you could be right with him. You could be innocent again. This is something that only Christians can do. So let me talk at the very end of this message and just give you a couple applications. One is I want us to know both books. And by both books, I mean general and special revelation. There is a tool that God has given us of common ground when we talk to people. I know that everybody in this world has a similar grounding of moral right and wrong. Use this. Don't even make arguments to prove it. Just trust that God has given them a sense of right and wrong, and because of that, all people wrestle with an issue of guilt, and they need to have it assuaged. Some people do that by trying to run from their guilt. Some people try to flood their guilt with alcohol or with sex or drugs or whatever. But recognize that you are on the same level with them. I can have a conversation with you, and I don't have to prove to you that you're guilty. You already know that. I just have to get you to dwell on it just long enough that you'll take account that something has to be done. That's what a sonogram is, by the way. It's not an argument. A sonogram's not a pro-life argument. It's just a picture of a life that makes you stop long enough to say, I can't go through with this. Second thing I want us to wrestle with as Christians is, do you know especially the second book, right? The Bible, God's special revelation, well enough that you can use this perfect book to walk somebody through how they can have hope and life, have their soul restored? God says there are people walking all around here that are broken with grief. This is the only solution to that grief. Do you know it well enough to use it? Can you show somebody the gospel here? Can you show them hope here? Joy here? This is more valuable than all the gold in the world. This is sweeter than the honey from a honeycomb, because this says you do not have to stay in your guilt. So we can't let it sit in the shelf and not do in our lives and in others' lives what it was made to do. What I want to do now is take a moment to respond, and I'll invite the music team to come up. I would like for us to think for a little bit, personally, a time of just reflection. Am I a person that has offered hope? People already have guilt, and I don't want to deny the reality of that, and I don't want to be a person that just teaches them to repress or put their head in their sand. But what makes us unique and special here as Christians is not that we can add more guilt, but that we have the message to have that guilt assuaged, taken away. So is that something that you're doing? Are you practicing the special responsibility that you have in having the Word? When that's done, after we have a time of response, what I'm going to ask them to do is Dana to come up, and I want Dana to lead us in a time of reflecting, especially how we can do this in regard to abortion through First Coast Women's Services, how we can support and pray. But let's start by looking in at ourselves and just asking God, am I being obedient to treasure your word rightly? So if you will, if you'll stand with us and sing.